She had 37 cents in her pocket, and a choice that would change everything. The rain hammered against the glass doors of the downtown office building, each drop a reminder of how far she'd fallen, how desperately she needed this moment to matter. Chen stood there soaked to the bone, her worn-out sneakers leaving puddles on the marble floor, knowing that beyond those doors waited either salvation or one more rejection in a lifetime that had become a catalogue of closed doors and empty promises. Stay with me. What happens in the next 60 seconds will shatter everything you thought you knew about chance encounters and destiny. Because sometimes the universe doesn't whisper, sometimes it shouts. And on this ordinary Tuesday morning, in this glass tower where dreams were manufactured and futures were decided, Maya was about to discover that the man holding the door for her wasn't just being polite. He was about to become the answer to a prayer she'd been too exhausted to speak aloud. The security guard at the desk barely glanced at her. Why would he? She looked like someone who'd taken a wrong turn, wandered into a world where her threadbare coat and rain-matted hair didn't belong. She clutched a manila envelope against her chest. Inside, a resume that had been rejected 43 times, meticulously counted, each rejection a small death of hope. Her hands trembled not from the cold, but from hunger, from the 3 days she'd stretched a single loaf of bread, from the shame of sleeping on her cousin's couch, while pretending she had interviews lined up, opportunities just around the corner, when the truth was she had nothing except this envelope and a stubborn refusal to disappear. She'd come here without an appointment, without a connection, armed only with desperation and a newspaper clipping about Tech Vision Industries seeking innovative minds willing to think differently. The ad had felt like a message written specifically for her, though she knew that's what drowning people do. They see life rafts in every passing piece of driftwood, but she'd taught herself to code using library computers and YouTube tutorials. She'd built 3 apps that nobody downloaded, but that worked beautifully elegantly, solving problems she'd encountered in her own impossible life. She had something to offer. She just needed someone to see her long enough to notice. The elevator doors opened, and a man stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid-fire sentences about quarterly projections and market disruptions. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Maya's former rent, before she'd lost even that. His presence commanded space in that particular way of people accustomed to being heard, obeyed, remembered. He should have walked past her. Men like that always walked past people like her. That was the unspoken rule of the vertical city, where elevators carried the worthy upward and left everyone else stranded in lobbies, dreaming. But he stopped. He ended his call mid-sentence, pocketed his phone, and looked directly at her with eyes that seemed to catalogue everything. The trembling hands, the desperate clutching of the envelope, the particular exhaustion that comes from fighting gravity when you have no wings. "You look like you're trying to decide if you belong here," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, lacking the sharp edges she'd expected from someone dressed in armor that expensive. Maya's throat closed. Words tangled there, fighting to emerge, but shame is a powerful silencer. She managed only, I was hoping to. They said you might be hiring." "They said?" His eyebrow lifted slightly, curious rather than dismissive. "Who's they?" "The newspaper, the ad. It said you wanted people who think differently." Her voice gained strength, fueled by the particular courage of having nothing left to lose. "I know I don't have a degree from Stanford or connections or—" She gestured vaguely at his suit, her coat, the chasm between them. "But I built something, 3 apps. They solve real problems. Problems people like me face every day. Navigating social services, finding food banks, optimizing bus routes when you can't afford a car. Nobody important uses them, but they work." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the professional facade. He studied her with renewed intensity, and for a terrible moment, she thought he might laugh, might pat her shoulder with practiced sympathy before disappearing into his important life. Instead, he said, "Show me." 2 words. 2 impossible, beautiful words that no one had spoken to her in the 8 months since she'd lost everything. Her job, her apartment, her carefully constructed middle-class existence that had turned out to be built on sand, that washed away the moment the company downsized, and she became just another statistic, another invisible casualty of market corrections and restructuring. She fumbled for her phone, the screen cracked but functional, held together with clear tape and hope. Her fingers shook as she opened the first app, explained its logic, the problem it solved. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his watch or glance toward the elevator, toward whatever empire awaited him upstairs. He listened with the kind of attention she'd forgotten existed, the kind that makes you feel human again, seen. "The code is elegant," he said finally, scrolling through screens, testing functions. "Self-taught?" She nodded. "How long?" 18 months. Every hour the library was open, every tutorial I could find. He handed back her phone, and she braced for the gentle dismissal, the impressive but that would send her back into the rain, back to the couch, back to wondering how many more rejections a person could absorb before they simply dissolved. But instead he extended his hand. "Daniel Reeves," he said, "come upstairs. Let's talk about what thinking differently actually means." She stared at his outstretched hand, unable to process what was happening, unable to trust that this moment was real. I don't have an appointment. Security won't." "Security works for me," he said simply. "I'm the CEO." The world tilted. The marble floor seemed to shift beneath her worn sneakers. The CEO. The man who'd stopped, who'd listened, who'd seen her 3 homemade apps built on desperation and determination. He wasn't just some middle manager taking pity. He was the person who could change everything. And he was waiting, hand still extended, for her to decide if she was brave enough to reach back. Maya's hand moved almost without her permission, meeting his in a handshake that felt less like a greeting and more like crossing a threshold into a parallel universe where impossible things happened to people like her. His grip was firm, warm, grounding her in the reality of this moment, even as her mind screamed that none of this could be real. CEOs didn't stop for shivering women in lobbies. They didn't ask to see homemade apps. They certainly didn't invite strangers upstairs with the casual certainty of someone offering a glass of water to a person dying of thirst. The elevator ride lasted 43 seconds. She counted each one, a nervous habit from childhood, measuring time in heartbeats and held breaths. Daniel stood beside her in comfortable silence, but she felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing against her ribs. What did he see when he looked at her? The capable programmer she'd fought to become, or the desperate woman she'd been reduced to? Did he know she'd skipped breakfast, lunch, and probably dinner unless this meeting somehow miraculously changed her trajectory? Did he notice the way her coat smelled faintly of mildew from drying too many times in her cousin's basement, or how her hair hadn't seen a professional cut in over a year? The executive floor opened onto a world of floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist design, where even the air felt expensive, filtered through systems that probably cost more than her entire previous year's salary. Assistants moved with choreographed efficiency, their outfits crisp and purposeful, their faces registering brief surprise as Daniel walked past with this rain-soaked stranger trailing in his wake. She felt their eyes, felt the questions forming. Who was she? What was she doing here? Had security failed somehow? Daniel led her into a corner office that commanded a view of the entire city, the same city that had chewed her up and spit her out, that had transformed from a landscape of possibility into a maze of closed doors and dwindling options. From up here, it looked different, beautiful, manageable, full of light instead of shadows. She wondered if that's what power did, elevated you high enough that you could no longer see the people struggling on the ground, their faces pressed against windows, hoping someone would look down and remember they existed. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than her last month's rent. She perched on its edge, unable to fully relax into comfort she hadn't earned, didn't deserve, couldn't trust. He moved behind his desk, but didn't sit, instead turning to face the window, hands in his pockets, posture contemplative. "Tell me something, Maya. When did you decide you were poor?" The question struck her like a physical blow, unexpected and precise. What? Poor? When did that become your identity?" He turned to face her, his expression not unkind but unflinchingly direct. "You introduced yourself to me that way, in the lobby. Not as a programmer, not as an innovator, not as someone who built solutions to impossible problems using nothing but determination and public library Wi-Fi. You apologized for not having a degree, for not having connections, for not being someone else. So I'm asking, when did you decide that's who you are? Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. When the money ran out, she said, voice barely above a whisper, when I couldn't make rent, when I had to choose between eating and keeping my phone active so potential employers could reach me. When I realized that everything I'd built, my apartment, my independence, my sense of self, could vanish in 8 weeks, and nobody noticed, nobody cared. I became invisible. Daniel nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in my car, he said quietly, the words landing in the space between them, like stones dropped into still water. Not because I was building a startup and being scrappy. That's the story we tell ourselves to make failure romantic. I was sleeping in my car because I'd made catastrophic decisions, burned every bridge, lost everything. I had a computer science degree from MIT and nothing else. No money, no prospects, no one returning my calls. Maya stared at him, unable to reconcile this confession with the man before her, with the corner office and the tailored suit and the casual authority that moved security guards and assistants like chess pieces. What changed? Someone saw me, he said simply. Not the failure, not the guy sleeping in a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield. Someone saw what I could build if given the chance. She was a venture capitalist named Patricia Chen. He paused, studying Maya's face. Any relation? My aunt, Maya whispered, the connection clicking into place like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. Patricia Chen. She died 2 years ago. Cancer. The silence that followed was heavy with memory and meaning. Daniel's expression shifted, softening into something that looked like grief, like gratitude, like the complex emotion of owing everything to someone you can never repay. She changed my life, he said finally. She gave me seed money for my first startup, but more than that, she gave me back my sense of possibility. She had this way of seeing through the surface of things, of recognizing potential in people everyone else had written off. He paused. She talked about you, her niece who was studying computer science, who was going to change the world. She was proud of you. These stories of hidden connections and second chances aren't easy to share, but if you feel the weight of these invisible threads that bind us, subscribe and join us. Your like can spread empathy, and your comment might share a story that touches another soul, because sometimes the universe doesn't deal in coincidences, it deals in purpose. Maya couldn't stop the tears now. They came in a rush, 2 years of grief she'd buried under the more immediate crisis of survival, under the shame of failing to live up to Aunt Patricia's pride, to her investment in a niece who'd had every advantage and still ended up shivering in lobbies begging for chances. She helped pay for my tuition, Maya said through the tears. She believed in me when my parents said computer science wasn't practical, wasn't a real career for someone from our family. And then she died, and I lost my job, and everything fell apart, and I couldn't even go to her funeral because I was too ashamed to face the family, to admit I'd failed, that her investment in me had been wasted. Daniel moved around the desk, pulled a chair next to hers, sat down at her level rather than looming above. Patricia told me once that investing in people wasn't about guarantees. It was about planting seeds and trusting that even if they don't bloom immediately, even if they go dormant through a harsh winter, they're still alive under the surface, waiting for the right conditions. He leaned forward, his voice intense, urgent. Maya, you didn't fail her. You survived. You kept learning, kept building, kept solving problems even when you had every reason to give up. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people with degrees and connections and safety nets never create anything, never push through difficulty, never develop the resilience you've built? She wanted to believe him. God, how desperately she wanted to believe that her suffering had meaning, that the months of hunger and fear and sleeping on couches had forged something valuable rather than simply breaking her down into someone unrecognizable. Why are you doing this? She asked. Really, you don't owe me anything. You didn't owe Aunt Patricia anything beyond what you already achieved. Because she taught me that debts aren't always meant to be repaid to the original lender, Daniel said. Sometimes you pay them forward. Sometimes you become for someone else what someone was for you. He stood, walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. I've been looking for someone like you for 6 months. Someone who understands the problems facing people who fall through the cracks, who can build technology that serves the forgotten, the overlooked, the struggling. Not charity apps, real solutions that restore dignity and agency. He handed her the folder. Inside was a job description, a salary that made her breath catch, a title that seemed impossibly senior for someone whose resume had been rejected 43 times. Head of Social Impact Technology, she read aloud, the words foreign on her tongue. Daniel, I'm not qualified for... You're the most qualified person I've met, he interrupted. You've lived the problems, you've built the solutions with nothing. Imagine what you could build with resources, with a team, with the backing of a company that wants to prove technology can be a force for equity, instead of just another tool that widens the gap between the haves and have-nots. Maya's hands trembled as she held the folder, as if the paper itself carried an electrical current, too powerful for her exhausted body to process. The numbers swam before her eyes. The salary alone was more than she'd made in her previous job, more than she'd dreamed possible for someone whose last 3 meals had consisted of peanut butter, spread thin on discount bread, and tap water flavored with stolen coffee shop honey packets. But it wasn't the money that made her throat close and her vision blur. It was the title, the possibility, the terrifying, exhilarating recognition that this man, this stranger who'd turned out to be not a stranger at all, but part of a web of connection she hadn't known existed, was offering her not just survival but purpose. I need you to understand something, she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes, to be honest even if honesty cost her this miracle. I'm not the person Aunt Patricia knew. That girl was confident, full of plans, believed the world would recognize her talent and reward her effort. I'm not her anymore. I'm someone who's learned to make herself small, to apologize for taking up space, to expect rejection before it comes. I'm afraid that person can't do what you're asking. Daniel settled back against his desk, arms crossed, studying her with that same unnerving attention he'd given her apps in the lobby. You know what Patricia told me the day she wrote that first check? She said, Daniel, I'm not investing in who you are right now. I'm investing in who you'll become when you remember who you were before life tried to convince you that you were small. He let the words hang in the air between them. Maya, do you think she was wrong about you? Do you think she wasted her belief on someone who wasn't worth it? No, Maya whispered, then stronger. No, she saw something real. I know she did. I felt it once, that certainty that I could build things that mattered, solve problems that everyone else ignored because they weren't profitable or flashy enough. But Daniel, knowing you had something and finding it again after it's been beaten out of you, those are different things. Then let me ask you differently, he said, leaning forward. Those 3 apps you built in libraries while you were sleeping on a couch, going hungry, watching your life collapse, did you build them because you thought they'd make you money? Because you thought they'd impress someone? No, she admitted. I built them because I needed them. Because every day I was navigating systems designed to humiliate people asking for help, standing in lines at social services where the workers treated you like you were trying to cheat them, where the websites were built by people who'd never been desperate, never had to choose between bus fare and food. Her voice gained strength, anger burning through the shame. I built them because I was tired of being invisible, tired of problems that could be solved with basic logic and decent design being ignored, because the people suffering from them didn't matter to anyone with power or money or... She stopped, hearing herself, hearing the passion that had survived everything, that had refused to die even when she'd had nothing left but spite and stubbornness. Daniel was smiling, not with amusement but with recognition, with the satisfaction of someone who'd been proved right about something important. There she is, he said softly. There's the person Patricia told me about. The one who builds things not for applause but because she can't stand watching problems exist when solutions are possible. He pushed off from the desk, began pacing, energy radiating from him like heat from a fire. Maya, Tech Vision has billions in revenue. We've built platforms that connect people, streamline businesses, optimize everything from supply chains to dating algorithms. We're excellent at making things efficient and profitable. But we've failed at the thing that matters most, using technology to actually improve lives for people who need it most, not just people who can afford premium subscriptions. He stopped at the window, gesturing toward the city sprawling below. Out there, millions of people are struggling with problems that could be solved with technology, but nobody's building for them because there's no obvious profit motive. Food insecurity, housing instability, healthcare access, educational gaps, the bureaucratic nightmare of social services. These are massive challenges affecting real human beings. But to most tech companies, they're invisible. They're not sexy, they don't generate viral growth or unicorn valuations. Maya felt something shifting inside her chest, like tectonic plates moving, revealing new landscape. You want to change that? I want to prove that a major tech company can be profitable while also being genuinely useful to people beyond the upper middle class, Daniel said, turning to face her. But I can't do it without someone who understands both worlds, the technical expertise to build sophisticated solutions and the lived experience to know what problems actually need solving, how to design interfaces that respect users' dignity, how to reach people who've been let down by every system supposedly designed to help them. If you've ever felt the pain of being invisible, of having solutions but no platform, of watching problems persist because no one with power cared enough to listen, subscribe and stay with us. Share your thoughts in the comments because these stories matter, and your voice might be the one that connects another heart to hope. Why now? Maya asked. TechVision has been successful for years. Why suddenly decide to focus on social impact? Daniel's expression shifted, becoming more vulnerable, more human. Because Patricia Chen died, leaving me a letter that I've read approximately 500 times in 2 years. She said she was proud of what I'd built, but she hoped I'd remember that success wasn't measured in stock prices or user metrics. She hoped I'd use what she'd given me, not just the initial investment, but the lesson about seeing people, really seeing them, to do something that mattered beyond the balance sheet. He pulled a worn envelope from his jacket pocket, the paper soft with handling. She said, "Pay it forward, Daniel. Find someone who needs what I gave you. Give them not just money, but belief. And together, build something that makes the world a little less cruel to people who are struggling." Maya couldn't breathe. The connection was too perfect, too impossible, too much like something designed by a universe that didn't actually deal in such tidy narrative arcs. "You're telling me that on the same morning, I decided to walk into this building with no appointment and nothing but desperation. You were already looking for someone to fulfill a promise you made to my dead aunt. I'm telling you that I've interviewed 47 candidates in 6 months, all with impeccable credentials, all saying the right things about wanting to make a difference," Daniel said. "None of them had built anything. None of them could describe a problem from lived experience. None of them had your 3 apps, created with nothing, solving real problems for real people." He held up the worn envelope. Patricia wrote something else in this letter. She said, "You'll know the right person when you meet them because they'll remind you of you. Not the polished version you've become, but the desperate, determined version who was sleeping in his car and still believed he had something to offer." Maya stood, her legs unsteady, her mind reeling with the implications of everything he was saying. She walked to the window, looked down at the streets where she'd been invisible just an hour ago, where she'd been one more struggling person in a city full of people fighting their own battles. From up here she could see the public library where she'd taught herself to code, the bus stop where she'd waited in the rain countless times, the neighborhood where her cousin's couch had been both refuge and reminder of how far she'd fallen. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need you to understand what you're getting. I'm going to build things that aren't glamorous. I'm going to insist on talking to actual users, people living in shelters and waiting in food bank lines and navigating the hell of bureaucratic systems. I'm going to push back when profit margins conflict with human dignity. I'm going to be difficult and stubborn and probably make enemies of people who think social impact is just good PR." "Good," Daniel said simply. "That's exactly why you're the right person." She turned to face him, this man who'd been a stranger 90 minutes ago and was now offering her a chance to reclaim not just her livelihood but her sense of purpose. her connection to the aunt who'd believed in her before she'd learned to doubt herself. Aunt Patricia used to say that coincidence was just God's way of staying anonymous, Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. I stopped believing that somewhere between losing my job and losing my dignity. But standing here, looking at this folder, learning that you've been carrying her letter around looking for someone to invest in the way she invested in you, maybe I was wrong. Maybe some things are meant to happen. Or maybe, Daniel said, we make meaning out of chance encounters by choosing to honor them, by deciding that this moment matters because we commit to making it matter. He extended his hand again, the gesture echoing their meeting in the lobby, but transformed by everything that had passed between them. What do you say, Maya Chen? Ready to pay forward a debt neither of us can ever truly repay? Maya's hand moved toward his, but she paused, suspended in that space between who she'd been forced to become and who she might be allowed to be again. Before I shake your hand, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest, I need to tell you something. I need to say it out loud so we both know what this means. She took a breath, gathering courage from somewhere deep, from that place inside her that had survived despite everything. For 8 months I've been ashamed of losing my job, of needing help, of failing to be the person Aunt Patricia believed I could be. I avoided family gatherings because I couldn't face their questions, their pity, their disappointment. I made myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared completely. Daniel waited, patient, giving her space to continue. But standing here, I realized something, Maya said, her voice gaining strength. I didn't fail. The system failed. And instead of giving up, instead of accepting that failure as my permanent reality, I taught myself new skills, built solutions to problems I was living, and kept showing up, to libraries, to interviews, to this lobby today, because some part of me, some stubborn part that sounds exactly like Aunt Patricia, refused to believe I was done. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. They were earned. They were real. So, when I shake your hand, I'm not accepting charity. I'm not accepting pity. I'm accepting an opportunity to do work that matters, to honor my aunt's memory by becoming for other people what she was for both of us, someone who sees past the surface, past the temporary circumstances, to the potential underneath. Daniel's eyes were bright with emotion. She would be so proud of you right now, he said quietly. Not because you're standing in my office accepting a job, but because you just articulated exactly the philosophy she tried to teach me. That dignity isn't something given or taken by circumstances. It's something you carry inside yourself, even when the whole world tells you you're worthless. Maya closed the distance, gripped his hand firmly, and felt something fundamental shift into place. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a reclamation, a resurrection, a choice to step back into the arena and fight for the person she'd almost lost, the person Aunt Patricia had seen clearly, even when Maya herself had forgotten she existed. When do I start? She asked. How about now? Daniel gestured toward the door. I'll have HR rush the paperwork, but there's someone I want you to meet first. Someone who's been waiting for the right person to lead this initiative. He led her out of his office, down a corridor lined with conference rooms where serious people discussed quarterly projections and market disruptions, the machinery of capitalism humming efficiently. But at the end of the hall was a different kind of space. A large room with whiteboards covered in diagrams, sticky notes in rainbow colors, and a team of people who looked up with undisguised curiosity as Daniel entered with Maya trailing behind. Everyone, this is Maya Chen, Daniel announced, your new head of social impact technology. She's going to lead the division we've been building toward, and I expect full support as she shapes this team into something that makes tech vision not just profitable but meaningful. He turned to Maya. These folks have been working on preliminary research, but they've been waiting for someone with vision to give them direction. They're yours now. The next hours passed in a blur of introductions, explanations, brainstorming sessions that felt more like jazz improvisation than corporate meetings. Maya found herself sketching on whiteboards, describing the apps she'd built, explaining the pain points she'd experienced navigating systems designed to help, but that too often humiliated. The team listened with genuine interest, asked questions that showed they actually cared about building something useful rather than just impressive. For the first time in months, Maya felt her brain firing on all cylinders, felt that electric excitement of creative problem-solving, of working with people towards something bigger than individual survival. When evening came and the team finally dispersed, promising to reconvene tomorrow with fresh energy and new ideas, Daniel returned to find Maya still at the whiteboard, adding notes, refining concepts. "You should go home," he said gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense." Maya laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "Home," she repeated. "I should probably find one of those. An actual one, not just my cousin's couch." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of the practical realities that came with this transformation. "Daniel, I know the salary is generous, but it'll be a few weeks before I can afford first month's rent and deposit and—" "Already handled," he interrupted, pulling out another folder. This man and his folders, his preparation, his way of anticipating needs before they were spoken. "Tech Vision has corporate housing for executives relocating. There's a furnished apartment available immediately. Yours for 3 months while you get settled. After that, with your salary, you can find whatever suits you." He handed her a key card. "It's not charity, Maya. It's standard practice for senior hires. You've just never been a senior hire before." She took the key card, this small piece of plastic that represented safety, privacy, a door she could close and lock, a space that was hers. The tears came again, but different this time. Not grief or shame, but relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for remembering Aunt Patricia, for giving me a chance to be the person she believed I was. Thank you for walking into that lobby today," Daniel said, "for being brave enough to keep showing up despite 43 rejections, for building things that mattered when you had nothing." He smiled. "Patricia used to say that the universe puts people in each other's paths for reasons we don't always understand immediately. Maybe she's still doing that, still connecting people who need each other, still making sure her investment in human potential keeps paying dividends." Maya nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She thought about the morning, about standing in the rain deciding whether to walk through those glass doors, about the 37 cents in her pocket, and the choice that had felt impossible but necessary. She thought about Aunt Patricia, about the woman who'd believed in a niece studying computer science and a desperate man sleeping in his car, who'd seen past circumstances to potential, who'd understood that sometimes the best investment wasn't in sure things but in people worth the risk. "I'm going to make you proud," Maya said finally, speaking to Daniel but also to the memory of her aunt, to the version of herself she'd almost lost, to everyone who'd ever felt invisible and forgotten. "I'm going to build things that matter. I'm going to use this chance not just to change my own life, but to create opportunities for other people who are standing in lobbies right now, shivering and hoping someone will see them." "I know you will," Daniel said simply. "That's why you're here." As Maya left Tech Vision's offices that evening, stepping into the same rain that had soaked her that morning, everything looked different. The city wasn't a maze of rejection anymore. It was a landscape of possibility, of problems waiting to be solved, of people needing someone to build bridges instead of walls. She had a key card in her pocket instead of 37 cents. She had a purpose instead of desperation. She had a team waiting for her tomorrow, ready to create something meaningful. But more than any of that, she had herself back. The version who believed she deserved to take up space, who knew her voice mattered, who understood that falling down didn't define you nearly as much as the decision to stand back up. This was Maya's journey, but countless others are waiting to be told. Stories of connection, resilience, and the invisible threads that bind us together. If you've ever felt the pain of being overlooked, the shame of struggling, or the hope that comes from an unexpected encounter that changes everything, join our community. Subscribe to hear more stories that celebrate the human spirit. Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you have your own story of a chance meeting that transformed your life, or maybe you're still waiting in that lobby, hoping someone will see you. Either way, you're not alone. Together, we honor the Patricia Chens of the world, the people who invest in potential rather than polish, who see dignity in struggle, and who remind us that sometimes the universe doesn't deal in coincidences, but in purpose. Like this video if it touched your heart. Comment if you believe in second chances. And subscribe, because every story we share is a reminder that no one is truly invisible. Sometimes they just need the right person to look closely enough to see them.